Well, hey friend, good to have you back. Glad you're here. Glad we get to dive in and continue our study on just becoming the person that God made you, made me to be. And I think what we all want is we want genuine transformation. We want real fruit in our lives. And so I know we talked about this last week, that creation is waiting. Family, the whole world is waiting for us just to become the sons and daughters of God, not our long list of dues. The world is waiting on, our families are waiting on us to just become who God made us to be. So today, we're just gonna talk about the spiritual fruit of joy. And so I'm gonna define that for us. Can I do that? Joy is the emotional state where gratitude, pleasure, and genuine happiness can transcend your circumstance and overflow in worship. Now, the reason I'm going to define that way, I know there's a lot of definitions of joy, is because I just want us to talk about that place where gratitude and pleasure and genuine happiness, regardless of circumstance, can really coexist. So I know that you know this, but that's easy. Joy is easy to find in the easy places, right? Like I just got back from vacation with the kids, right? My wife and I, it was the first time in 2.5 years that we had all 5 kids together, and we just had a ball. I can tell you the last night on the beach, sun coming down, it's gorgeous. Kids are laughing, playing. I'm just telling you, real easy for me to say, God, you're so good, and I'm so grateful and I'm so happy, so easy. But then you also know joy, by definition, is something that you find regardless of your circumstance. So joy, that place of gratitude, pleasure, and genuine happiness, to find that in the hard places is a little different, right? So I remember if I could go to a place where I think is probably the hardest place that I've ever had to find joy in my life. It was when my son and my family got into a wreck, and he ended up kind of in a real bad spot. And I'll just say the helicopter was on the way, and we didn't know where things were going, and we were just in a room stuck. And in that moment, I just couldn't find joy. I mean, I didn't have words to say. I didn't have a prayer to pray. But I will never forget when Joy walked in the room. It was a woman, I don't know, I never saw her again. When the curtain opened and we're in the back and everything's crazy, and she stepped in and she's like, I just feel like I'm supposed to pray in here. And we're like, literally, we had nothing to say to her, and she's like, I'm just gonna pray. We're like, okay. And she just started praying this prayer over my family and over us, that we'd be reminded of God's presence even in the midst of bad circumstances. And I'm just telling you, and I know it doesn't make sense, but in that moment, joy entered the room. And all of a sudden I recognized God's got this, and He's for us, and He loves us. And then no matter what happens, we are anchored in this joy that transcends our circumstance. So, here's what I want to talk about. How do we get that kind of joy? Like, how do we allow God to give us that genuine joy regardless of what's going on or what the verdict or what the situation is? How do we get that kind of joy? So Paul dives in. We're going to keep going into Colossians. He says, verse 9, he says this of chapter 1. He says, for this reason, since the day we heard about you, we've not stopped praying for you. I love that. We've continually asked God to fill you with the knowledge of His will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives. And he says, listen, we're praying for you, and it's this word that you would understand His will. That word will is not a great translation. The Greek word is thelema. It's probably better translated like heart. This is His heart. So like if you're somebody that's ever been a part of a will and testimony, well, the point of a will and testimony is somebody is reading what was on the heart of the person when they passed away. That's the concept behind will. And so he says, listen, I want you to understand God's heart. And in order to understand His heart, we're gonna need lots of wisdom and understanding like that the Spirit gives. And so he goes on and says, and here's why, so that you can live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every good way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to His glorious might, so that you might have great endurance and patience. And hear this, and giving joyful thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of His holy people in the kingdom of light. For He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So here's where we're gonna lean, and we've been talking about this metaphor a little bit. So the question would be, How do we lean into the metaphor of roots and fruit, right? Like, let's pay attention to the roots so we can get the fruit. So where do we plant our roots so that real, genuine joy shows up in our lives? And Paul says this, well, the key, friend, is knowing God's heart. You might say, well, how do I know God's heart? Well, you can look at Jesus, right? He's the image of the invisible God, but ultimately you get to also look at God's promises. What has he said and what has he done? See, a promise by definition is a reason to expect in the future. So if I make you a promise from a heart that is pure, then you have a reason to expect. For example, if I promise that I'm gonna be there, then you have a reason to expect that I'm gonna be there. If I've always been there, then you really know that I'm gonna be there. If I promise that I'll be faithful, well, if I've always been faithful in the past, you have no reason to expect anything other than the fact that I'm gonna be there because I said I was gonna be there. If you promise that something is true, well, if I've never lied, then it's probably gonna be true. A promise is a powerful thing. It gives you confidence in the future. And here's what I believe, and here's what I think Paul is saying. God is a promise maker. All through Scripture, promises. One theologian counted 7,487 promises from God to men and women. That's a lot of promises. What is that revealing? Well, that's revealing his heart. Who is he, and what is he saying that we can expect? Here's what I also believe. There's a whole lot of people that are making promises out there, right? I mean, when I talk about trust and promises, there's a big difference when it's a promise from God versus anyone else, right? I mean, if somebody else makes a promise, I'm like, maybe, like we'll see, right? But here's what I've learned, and this is what we have to learn, this is what we have to soak in. If God said it, he's gonna do it. Like he promised he would, you can count on it. Which you know, before we go too far, that most of us have problems trusting, right? I mean, part of that is because we've been given so many promises in our lifetime. Promises that were spoken to you were real and you believed them. And then, like you believed your business partner when he said, we're in this together, we got this, until he swindled you. You believed that your employer and your boss like had your best intentions in mind until they dismissed you. Until your spouse left you, until your boyfriend cheated on you, until your best friend really let you down and you were left with nothing but empty promises, wondering, how do I make sense of all this and where do I go from here? But what I want you to know is that God's promises that expose his heart, they're so different than any other promise. God hasn't made a single promise he hasn't kept. Like, listen, if God said it, he's gonna do it. Somebody told me one time that a promise from God is kind of like insurance, right? Like as life happens, it always does. With insurance, you're not worried about what might burn down, what might get wrecked, because you know what? It's covered. Like you can live with peace in a promise that no matter what, it's handled. It's gonna be, I don't know what's about to happen, but it's gonna be fine. They said the only problem is when you don't have insurance or when you don't know what's covered by the insurance. It's kind of like living life not really knowing, wondering if you might lose it all in a moment. But if you just knew that it was covered, like if you know, like his heart, his promises, this is covered. If you knew God said it, he's gonna do it, then all of a sudden something shifts inside of you. It's kind of like this. Okay, so I have this barn, all right? This barn in the back of the house. And I say barn loosely because it's more of a wooden structure where I put my man stuff and it's about to fall down. But anyways, it's got chainsaws and mowers, woodworking stuff. But if the boys ran into the house and told me the barn was on fire, I would have one of two responses, right? Like if I didn't know that it was insured, you would see me diving into the fire, grabbing anything of value as quickly as I could, and I'd feel like I was losing it all. But if I knew it's insured, like the fire department would probably roll up and I'd have like a garden hose in one hand and like a s'more stick maybe. Because why? Because it's covered, man. And God's promises are like that. If God said it, that's his heart, He's gonna do it. So the question is then, what has God promised? What is his heart? I mean, Matt, what do I need to soak into my roots so that I can walk in the genuine fruit of joy? And so here's what you want to soak in. All of God's promises, hear me, they're true. I didn't say all of your expectations. I said all of the promises. And I can't go through all 7,487, but what I'm telling you is, I would love to really, literally, right now, speak into your life the promises that God has for you. Like right now, some of you are facing trouble like you've never faced in your family, in your circumstances, and you need to hear from God's heart that in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Some of you are being tempted like you've never been tempted in your lives before. And 1 Corinthians would tell you, listen, I love you. No temptation has overcome you that's unusual for human beings, but God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond your strength. Instead, along with the temptation, he'll also provide a way out so that you can be able to endure it. Some of you aren't sure where the next paycheck's coming from. And Philippians 4:19 would say, hey, listen, and God will fully supply your every need according to his glorious riches in Messiah Jesus. Some of you are exhausted and anxious and stressed. How am I ever gonna have joy? And you need to hear the promise from the Lord. He says, listen, hey, come to me. All you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So how do you find joy? Well, you gotta soak in his heart for you. His heart that he'll never leave you or forsake you. His heart that if you draw near to him, he's gonna draw near to you. His heart that he's always fighting for you, that he will never stop loving you, that his Holy Spirit lives inside of you, that you've been adopted by him, that you've been redeemed and reconciled, that you're now his children, that all things are right now working together for your good, that even the trials you're facing are maturing and deepening you, that he has come that you might have life and have it to the full, that because of Jesus, when you put your faith in him, heaven is now your home. And you will be with him and with us forever. Listen, you want joy? Soak in his promises, trust his heart, and joy will come.